TimeXTender is a data warehouse automation platform that speeds up the processes of implementing a data warehouse. Start out by creating a project which is a container for the model that we are going to build. There are some initial settings that I'm not going to go into, but they can be looked in our user guide. Within a project, you need to define a business unit, which is also just an organizing container. And within a business unit, you need to have a staging database where data from the individual data sources are stored. Just call it default. I'll just create a database. So with that, we have now the staging area, and this is where we can add data sources as well. We also create a data warehouse. And then I'll just point. So now we have some data warehouse and a staging area, so we are ready to begin building our model. This can be done by adding data sources and then building a model based on the data source. We also have some adapter technologies, which is a more intelligent connector. TimeXTender also allows the model to be built based on a Kimball approach, where you on the data warehouse level design your tables and fields, and then after that has been approved by the organization, you can then connect to the data sources and fill the tables with the information needed. I'm going to add a data source from AdventureWorks, so just pointing out where the database physically is located. And with that, we're going to read the metadata structure of the database. We have now the meta structure at the right side, and it's now ready for us to select tables or individual fields. So I'm just going to build a sales model where I'm going to have some tables selected. If I want to select something individually, I can do that by opening the table so I see the fields, and then select just the fields I would like to add to my model. These are the only fields visible, so whatever I select on the right side is going to be visible as a part of the data source. It's also going to be listed as a part of the staging area because this is the destination for the source data. So this is where we copy the data from the sources and stage it in a database. I have different tables, and some of them are ready for further use. Some needs to be restructured a little bit. So I have, for example, my customer, where I have my customer ID, but I do not have the name of the customer itself. That information is found on the person table, where I have a first name and a last name. And the two tables are linked by business entity ID to person ID. So in TimeXTender, the way you link the tables are just dragging and releasing. Then we create a relation between the two tables. That means that I could now move first and last name. But before I do that, I want to concatenate so I get the full name. So I'm adding a custom field and add full name to it. So we just added an extra field to the table, and now we can use the built-in functionality to transform or add data to this. So there's embedded in TimeXTender is a bunch of default things you can do to a field. There's also the ability to create what we call snippets, which is predefined calculations. So I've done so, and the formula is here, and then everybody that uses this formula should just drag the individual fields into this position. And now we created an automated calculation. This is actually the information we want on our customer table. So now I can drag this and move it here. So basically that allowed us to not to spend or to use a person table in our further on in our solution. So what we need to do now is basically move the tables that are ready. So I can move country region, I can move territory into our data warehouse area, and I can move customer. So these are all ready for use. Regarding our fact tables or our facts, they are located here on the sales order detail, but I do have some information on my header table as well that I would like to add. So first of all, I have a customer ID that I would like to add to my detail table so I can link it to my customer dimension table. So to do that, again, we need to create a relation between the tables, so sales order ID to sales order ID. And then I can now move customer ID. I can move order date, and I can move ship date. Here, the questions asked here is, do you want to use the relation that we did create between the two tables, so the sales order ID? If we do not use that, it will automatically use the relation created by the between the two tables. In this case, it's going to be the same, since we hard-coded here and the relation down here is the same. So we still have the relation here, sales order ID to sales order ID. But if I did change this, it will automatically change it up here as well. So now we also have a table containing the facts. I'll move that into my data warehouse area. Here we can rename it. So I'm just going to call this sales. All the fields could also be renamed if we want to. The next thing we need to do is to create relations. So if we do like this, I can now create the relations between country region and sales territory by dragging country region to country region. I can do the same for territory to territory, and I can do the same for customer to customer. So now we helped maybe business users or people that needs to connect to the data warehouse structure with the link between the tables as well. It's also possible to create tables directly. We can also add hierarchy tables, so using the information we have from the data sources to create our own hierarchies. I'm going to add a date table, which is basically just creating all dates between 2004 and then going forward 3 years all the time. This TimeXTender just populates with a bunch of different ways of displaying a date. The date value is the real date, so this I can link to my order date and I can link it to my ship date. So now I have a date dimension that plays two different roles. So with this, I've created the structure, a model containing the data that I want to put into my data warehouse. The tables are red, as you can see. This means that we have a model that has not been deployed to the SQL Server. This is a part of the differential deployment and managed deployment settings in TimeXTender that checks whether we have deployed the individual object to the SQL Server. So if I want to deploy it, as you can see here, the managed and differential, this will make every table black, meaning that now the model corresponds to what the SQL Server executes. So TimeXTender is a tool that creates the necessary scripts on the SQL server, so stored procedure views, SSIS packages, and everything that the SQL server needs. When it executes as it does now, it is the SQL server that does all the work. TimeXTender only initiates what needs to be executed. It doesn't execute anything. So all data stays on the SQL server. So now we have data in all tables, and that allows me now to basically build a solution on top of this. So in my case here, I want to use Qlik. So we have some data that we created on our data warehouse. I want to create a model based on that. So I'm adding a Qlik sales model. There are some settings. We can store data in QVD, or we can ask Qlik to store data in QVD. So with the model, I can now add data from my data warehouse or even from the staging. But in this case, we modeled the data, and I want to use this. So I'm going to add this to the model. So this is data from sales, and now I'm asked to select what fields do I want to use. So in this case, I want to use these three fields, so amount and quantity and sales order. I'm just going to call sales order. So like that. These are the fields that I want from sales. Then I want some dimensional information from my customer table. So I'm going to add that as well. And here we have a lot of different things, but we created something called full name, and that's the one I want to call customer. This is the only field I'm going to select. So this is the only field that's going to be visible in the Qlik application. When we create relations on the data warehouse and build a Qlik model, these relations will be listed here as the relations that TimeXTender suggests to use. If we use this, we make sure that the model built in Qlik is very solid. And the reason why is that with the TimeXTender joins, we create hash-based joins. So even if there is multiple relations between two tables, TimeXTender will only create one hashed relation. That means that the Qlik engine will only see this, and therefore it can match it. I'm going to add a couple of extra information. So this is just going to be my territory. Click OK, click OK, and again do the same for region. And again use the predefined join. Regarding date, as remember, we can add it to either the order date or the ship date. So I'm just going to use one of them, and then I'm going to rename the order or the date here to order date. And then I can add date to the model once again. As we can see, order date is in use, so we are going to select ship date. Again, rename it, ship date. So this concludes the Qlik model, and I can now deploy this. With that deployment, TimeXTender generates views on the data warehouse database that corresponds to the setup that we created here. If you want to implement Qlik directly on the data warehouse, you should use these views, so you still have that one hashed value to create your joins based on. In TimeXTender, we also added the possibility to either add the scripts manually, or in Qlik Sense we can actually create the application. For Qlik View, we should write this script into a text file that can be included as a part of the Qlik documents. But for the Qlik Sense, we can use the API to generate the application first, dump the script in a section, and then in this case load the data. So what we added was this application, and the model that we created is, as I said, solid, because TimeXTender always makes sure that there's only one relation between all tables. So you don't get synthetic keys generated when you use TimeXTender. This was the model. The script, as I said, is pushed into a section of its own. So this section should not be altered from within Qlik. If you need to alter this, it should be done in TimeXTender, because next time you deploy from TimeXTender, this will be overwritten, as it says on the top. So this is the way TimeXTender in general creates the data model. On top of this, we also have additional information. For example, the whole model that we created so far is also documented. So we can create a text file or a PDF that basically shows the full model. This is a technical documentation, so if we look at what it documents, it just documents the fields, what data types and so on. It's a linkable document, so you can click on this to go to the next level in the software or in the documentation. So the documentation is creatable from each version. So right now we deployed this model 2 times, one for creating the whole data warehouse structure and one for Qlik. So there are actually 2 versions ready in our repository where we can generate the documentation based on. As we can see here in the bottom, we are operating in our development environment, and if you want to move this into a production environment, I've set up 2 environments, so one for production and one for our development area. And within each environment, you can have different definitions of where is your data warehouse database, where's your, in case OLAP database, if you have that, staging databases, but you can also define data sources. So on the development, the data source could point to some database, and when you move it to production, it also changes the pointer to another database, meaning that you can work in your development environment on a test database, and then moving it into production can be done. Within each environment, you can have security set up, so you can control who can access what levels. You can add as many environments as possible. So one development, you can have a test, you can have a user acceptance test. To push the solution, we can now move it just by pushing a button. So we have version 2, and right now we have nothing in production, but I'm going to push version 2 into production as version number 1. So this will just transfer the whole model into the production environment. And now we're ready. So this is how you control different environments. It's also possible to create exports of data. So if you want to add some of the data that you created on the data warehouse, add it to an or text file that you can ship to a sister company or mother company, or if you want to push data into the cloud services. So I'm just going to create a file here, and what you can then do is add some of the data that you get from the data warehouse. So I'm going to add here. I can add what or select what fields I want to push into this database, and I can do it. So this is going to be for customer 1, and the reason why I write this is that the model, even we have the sales table here containing all the data, I only want to push this out for a specific customer. So I can then add a selection rule saying that the customer should be equal a certain customer. So this can be used to generate individual files for individual regions, for individual customers in the case as well. So this is data exports. We also have executions. So one of the things that we can do is to create multiple different ways of executing this package. So in this case, I'm just going to execute the full project. So this is what it's going to do. One thing I don't want it to execute is actually the execution. So I can exclude this part of the full project. The execute project will execute all steps defined in the model. Besides that, I now added exclude a specific step. This is also where you can control how many threads the SQL Server can utilize, and I'll show you that in a bit. But with this package, I can now add a schedule, define is it going to be daily, weekly, how many times during the day, or on specific hours during the day. So if I just select specific hours, it will now execute this. One of the things with TimeXTender and in the deployment or execution is that if I add a new one, call it Ollie, I can define that I only wanted to execute maybe my sales order header and my sales order detail, and only sales. I don't believe that there's going to be new countries or new customers or new persons, so I only want to execute the data. So this is something that I can then schedule on an hourly basis. So every 2 hours is fine. So this is going to be an hourly run. This is the execution. So if I want to change, so we built this model containing the extraction from the data sources, building a new solution. If I want to speed up the execution process and I have a powerful SQL Server, I can just allow it to use more threads. With that information, I can now just have it execute, and it will automatically distribute the load onto we probably did something. Need to deploy it first then. But it'll automatically distribute the load into multiple threads, and therefore minimize the execution time. This is done automatically because we have a model where the way we built the model with TimeXTender, dragging and creating relations between tables, will determine the execution order, and the system can then calculate what that order should be. I think this concludes the general presentation of TimeXTender. So I will stop here. Thanks. If you want to add more technical things to the solution, for example, only loading delta records, I'm going to show it here on our detail table, which is containing our facts. So I just created a key for the table, identifying new records. I can go through the table settings and enable source-based incremental. This means that we have some field on the source that determines whether a record is new or not. I'm not allowed to delete the data anymore then. But basically this is what needs to be, besides that we have to go to the data source setting here and create a incremental rule. And in our case, we have a modified date. When I select that, TimeXTender automatically keeps track of what has been extracted and what has not been extracted. And what's not been extracted will be executed next time and be a part of the delta load. So this is what needs to happen to create a delta load scripts. Okay, thanks.